Live from Chicago, this is Bruce DuMont with our Beyond the Beltway analysis of national politics, featuring occasional injections of rumor and innuendo, all offered up by our panel of political insiders, pundits, power brokers, public servants, professors, and most importantly, plain-speaking Americans from coast to coast. Tonight, featuring commentary by Dan Johnson, Brian Lambrecht, Mike Miller, and Paul Vallis. Our program tonight coming to you from our broadcast operation at the Museum of Broadcast Communications in Chicago. We're recorded tonight, but this is a historic show, and it is our first live Facebook broadcast. Is being recorded as well for future playback, but again, we're live on Facebook, and again, you'll be able to participate in this program by sending your Facebook questions in, and if you'd like to tweet me a comment, it's at DuMo, at D-U-M-O, and of course, you can join us on the World Wide Web at beyondthebeltway.com, but again, live on Facebook now, first time in the history of our broadcast, and I'll explain a little bit later on. So much has been happening in the world. It always does when we get together. But I want to begin by talking about North Korea. A couple of weeks ago, we've been talking about, the tremendous effort that the Trump administration put together to get this summit, on track. Now the president has pulled back from it, at least as of this moment, as we're doing this broadcast. And Mike Miller, economist from DePaul University, you're a Republican. You didn't support Donald Trump.
Correct.
But should he get any credit or blame? What should he be given right now, given the state of circumstances?
He should be given credit. I'm not sure any other president would have gotten us to this point. No deal is better than a bad deal. You never trust a communist. And strength is better than weakness, and he's showing all those things.
Dan Johnson is our card-carrying Democrat. Dan, a little different opinion, perhaps?
No, actually, no. I think, I was really glad Barack Obama worked hard to make peace with Iran, and I got to give credit. I'm glad he was trying to work hard to make peace with North Korea, and the reunification of the peninsula, that's phenomenal. I hope it continues to happen.
Brian Lambert, you're our card-carrying libertarian. Your reaction?
I think everything with North Korea was going really, really well. I think their state-run media was part of what was clogging things up a little bit. But when you let them work with South Korea on their own, I think it was fine. I don't think that the U.S. needed to get involved at this point. I think the egos had a lot to do with it. Kim was probably going to cancel the meeting before the U.S. was going to do it. And also the other thing we have to keep in mind here is China. China has much more influence on North Korea than I think South Korea or the United States has. They used to always keep a leash on them, but now I think they're trying to rein it in really big because they're scared of what could happen with North Korea.
Also joining us tonight is Paul Vallis. He is running for mayor of the city of Chicago. He headed the school district here in Chicago, as well as Philadelphia, and also New Orleans. Also did work in Haiti. And Paul, what do you think about North Korea?
They play by their own rules, so to speak. I actually think that they may end up having the summit eventually. I think they're jockeying for positions. But the bottom line is they're not testing missiles anymore. So that's a positive thing. So clearly the pressure is being felt.
Yeah, we got three Americans back.
And we got 3 Americans back, and we're much closer. We've made much more progress, I think, than we've made in the past. And there's something to be said for that. So let's see how things play out.
Although, Dan or Mike Miller, although we will never know what really triggered the most recent rhetoric from North Korea. I mean, it was conciliatory today, but for the last couple of days, it's been negative and sort of inflammatory. Allegedly, it's been connected to things that John Bolton said and things that the vice president said, and one of those leaders over there referred to the vice president as a political dummy. Did we celebrate too quickly? Did we saber rattle too much in the last 10 days?
I think we did, in the sense that we really thought that Kim meant what he said when he said he would denuclearize and he wants a deal. I think there's a chance, however, that the reason they have become so bellicose is because Kim is concerned if he leaves the country, he will not get back in, that there will be a coup while he is gone, and therefore he can't go to this until he's sure that he's going to have power when he returns.
You think that's a fear that he really has?
I mean,
I didn't realize he was that tenuous over there.
My insight into domestic North Korean politics is pretty limited, I gotta admit. But
Let's never stop you from giving an opinion, however.
well, let me tell you about the wings of the party. Look, I mean, clearly it's a big step back. I thought it was, great a couple of weeks ago. This is not on that path to peace. So it is really unfortunate that the president's pulled back. I think John Bolton's clearly a warmonger, and that's an atrociously bad appointment. But I do think, big picture, the efforts to peace in Korea ought to be applauded.
Ryan?
I don't think John Bolton's ever stopped rattling a saber. That's one of his big problems. With North Korea, I don't think Kim is as much scared of his own people or his own government as much as he is of China. I think China has a big influence in the area. They don't want to deal with the influx of people that are going to come across their border because there's going to be a lot of immigration across, and people are starving, hungry, looking for work, looking for escape. They're going to be coming across to China. So I think China's been keeping a tight leash on Korea, tighter than they used to over the last few decades.
Well, the president also thinks that because Kim Jong-un has gone for a second visit to China, that it's really the president of China that has forced him to change his tone and tune. And it seems to me that would make sense, especially when the United States is trying to negotiate a trade deal with China. Why wouldn't China use its power at this point?
I think what is different now than has not been the case in the past is China is putting pressure on the North Koreans to make concessions. I think, the whole, they didn't like what Pence said, or the whole rhetoric that was an excuse to do further jockeying, to delay the summit.
We gave them ammunition that we shouldn't have given.
We gave them ammunition, and they would have found some other excuse to delay the summit. But the bottom line is China is pushing them for the first time. That's why they're not testing missiles again. I mean, it could be wrong. You never know. It could fire a missile tomorrow. But I think progress is being made. But that's the way progress is going to be made there. There's never going to be any. They're never going to identify their goals, have clearly defined goals. They're going to jockey for position in a very Machiavellian approach. And eventually, I think there will be a summit and a possibility for some sort of agreement.
One other incredibly stupid thing was the minting of this coin, bringing Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump and putting them on the same celebratory coin. That was, you talk about celebrating before the game is over. I mean, that was a ridiculous thing to do. But also, the other thing I'm wondering is that South Korea has done a lot. South Korea is playing an integral role here. And I'm wondering whether Kim Jong-un, who maybe has some desire to reunify with Korea someday, that part of his position is he doesn't like the way that the president is sort of upstaging the president of Korea. I mean, the president of Korea didn't even know that the president was going to pull out of this summit. Right. It seems to me that we're not treating them maybe with the level of respect that perhaps we should.
I mean, the idea that President Trump isn't treating people with respect in the way that they should is not foreign, right? This is a theme. It's a feature, not a bug, right?
Yeah, but the North Korean economy is essentially broke. It's on the verge of bankruptcy. And if the sanctions continue, they're going to collapse in terms of an economy. Their people are going to starve. And clearly what
China
he wants,
help them?
I'm not
China
sure.
help
See,
them
that's
more
the whole
than they're
point.
helping them?
Part of the reason, it isn't just Trump. It's China has all of a sudden, as they've done all along, they've been the one that would make the difference between success and failure because they continue to sell products to North Korea. The rest of the world has stopped dealing with North Korea. North Korea would collapse if China, for a very short period of time, simply removed their exports to North Korea.
You are watching and listening to Beyond the Beltway from coast to coast and border to border. I'm Bruce DuMont. No calls tonight, but if you want to tweet me a comment, it's at Dumo, at D-U-M-O. We will roll on from Chicago and talk about school safety and violence in America when we roll on. Live from Chicago, it's Saturday Night Live, The Experience. Tuesday through Sundays, and open late on Wednesday nights at the Museum of Broadcast Communications. Order tickets at museum.tv.
A line is a powerful thing. It connects the global economy to your living room. Cleaner air to stronger markets. Factory floors to less crowded roads. Today's progress to tomorrow's promise. Norfolk Southern. One line, infinite possibilities.
DuMont back in Chicago. One of our guests this evening, as I mentioned, is Paul Vallis. He is running for mayor of the city of Chicago. There's a huge field that's running to replace Rahm Emanuel next year in the city of Chicago.
And getting bigger.
And getting bigger every day. Once upon a time, he headed the school system in Chicago and also Philadelphia, part of the rebuilding effort in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and also a lot of effort in Haiti, which continues today to put that country back together. So a distinguished public career. But again, you're running for mayor of the city of Chicago right now. And let me ask a question, because if you live in Chicago, you know that Mayor Emanuel has become one of the most vociferous opponents of President Donald Trump. And it's on the immigration issue, and the proudly wears the sanctuary city mayor. My question to you is, does it hurt the city that the president is so vociferous in his denunciation of the president, or is that good politics?
Good politics does not necessarily translate into good policy. You have to understand, I think Illinois is 47th or 48th in the nation when it comes to taxes flowing to Washington as opposed to what we're getting back. Maybe this is a race to the bottom. He wants to put us at 50th. But let me point out, let me speak to that issue, because I think for Rahm Emanuel, it's all about politics. Look, he has now become born again, so to speak, when it comes to immigration reform. And yet, when he was at the DCCC, he was one of the most vociferous opponents of immigration reform. Basically, what he told candidates was that this was a losing issue. And you remember, there have been fleeting opportunities to really achieve a compromise on immigration reform during the Bush administration. A lot of that opposition undermined the ability of the Bush White House to get immigration reform because he was a strong advocate. And then, of course, when he was chief of staff, they have that famous videotape of him basically, in effect, demonstrating his opposition or his discouragement of advancing the issue of immigration reform because he thought it was a political loser.
In this political climate, though, Paul, is it realistic for a candidate running for mayor of Chicago? Can they be perceived as being soft on Donald Trump?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm sure he thinks that bashing Trump is going to gain political points. Look, I oppose Donald Trump. I'm certainly critical of his actions. But if he thinks that reversing himself on immigration, when he was one of the hawks when it came to opposition to serious immigration reform, that suddenly his bashing of Trump is going to forgive him for the high crime rate in the city of Chicago, is going to forgive him for what he's done to the Chicago public schools, the recent reports of obviously documenting the failure of the school closings to in any way improve the academic performance of the students who moved to other schools. If that's going to forgive him, if that's going to forgive him for his failure to, in his first term, deal aggressively with the issue of pension reform, he in effect kicked the can down the road. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Sorry.
That's right.
This is just
hey,
terrible.
You're running for mayor. People are going to call you.
I swear to God. I thought I had turned that off.
That's Mayor Emanuel. He has really ticked off. You've attacked him on
It's probably my wife calling saying, tone it down a little, relax a little, put the coffee down. You've had too much coffee. But look, the bottom line is clearly, in a nutshell, he is running against Trump because he doesn't want to run on his record. And I think he sees points to be made by declaring Chicago a Trump-free zone, a Trump-free city.
Does the fact, as of this moment in time, there is no high visibility Hispanic challenger to him in a field of 9 or 10 people now? does that surprise you, or does it send a signal to you that maybe there's been some deal made between Hispanic leaders and Mayor Emanuel to sit this one out?
You know, are there being deals cut? You know, I'm not concerned about that. It's Chicago, so it's just the nature of Chicago that there's going to be some backroom deals being cut or some backroom politics. I don't care about that. I don't care if there's one Hispanic in the race or a dozen Hispanics, or how many African Americans in a race, or how many white candidates in a race. At the end of the day, my goal is to run an issue-oriented campaign and to let my proposals for dealing with the serious problems and the serious crisis that this city is facing in the area of crime, financial management, equity in the distribution of resources to the to the west side and the south side long neglected. Let's run an issue-oriented campaign and let my ideas be the criteria by which I'm judging.
Here's an idea I want you to elaborate, and let the other guests also offer their thoughts and opinions or questions as well. The country has been dealing over the last really couple of years with the school shootings. The numbers that we've had this year, a lot of effort has gone into what can we do to stop school shooting. My question to you, as the former head of the public schools in 3 major urban areas, why is it that these school shootings have tended to take place in smaller cities or towns, not big cities? What's the difference between the way we run our schools?
Well, you know, I think some of it has to do with the fact that in perhaps smaller communities, there is less of a concern for public safety that there may be in obviously some of the larger urban areas, particularly in communities where you've seen a lot of crime, so to speak. Look, my approach has always been to make sure that all the schools have the public safety resources needed, and regardless of where the schools are located, have the type of public safety assets on the ground, have the type of protocols so that in the event that there's a crisis, people know exactly what to do, like the live shooter drills and things like that.
But are there metal detectors in all schools now, Paul? And did you impose them when you were the head of the CPS?
Well, I think at the high school level, the metal detectors were installed in the schools long before my arrival, because if you remember, there was a fatality in the Chicago public schools during the many, many years ago, and that prompted the city to put police officers in the high schools. 2 police officers in the high schools, and create the school patrol. And then, of course, they have metal detectors. But my approach is, look, whether we like it or not, we're a gun-infested society, and there's guns flowing, and people are going to have access to guns. Sure, you can get some token or cosmetic reforms when it comes to the automatic weapons or background checks or delays in giving people, their licenses, or for that matter, being more aggressive about getting the guns out of the hands of individuals who may have mental health issues. But the bottom line is you're going to have the guns and they're out there, so you've got to take the precautions no matter what. Because you've had instances of mass shootings in countries where guns are literally outlawed. So regardless of what happens when it comes to gun control, gun regulation, and I'm a strong supporter of deep background checks, and I'm a strong supporter of gun control. There is no substitute to making sure that you have the security personnel in place in schools, and that you have a system. That you have a system of accessing information within the community about rumors and that things are going on, because so many of these.
But if there were more armed, not teachers, I'm not proposing that.
Right.
The president proposes that. But if there were more armed guards in more schools, would that reduce the likelihood of this happening, in your view, in your opinion?
It would, but you have to do a few other things. First of all, what I discovered in the districts that I've managed is we always set up a system 24/7 of reporting so that we could gather intelligence from the community. Because, in so many of these shootings, the shootings were almost telegraphed. People were talking to other people. There were rumors, the big criticism that the FBI didn't respond, as if the FBI is going to be able to protect 10,000 school districts across the country. But there was intelligence gathering. There was information out there about, and because children talk to other children. So before the, before the social media revolution, we had a more traditional 24/7 hotline reporting. And when I was in Philadelphia, we would get reports that somebody had brought an automatic weapon to school, or some kids buried an Uzi across the street from school. And we would get all sorts of intel about someone who had a weapon, or someone who had suicidal tendencies, or someone who had a serious drug problem that wasn't being addressed. And we were always able to respond to that. And I think what you have to do, in addition to making sure that you have proper security in the schools and the protocols for dealing with emergencies, is to also create this, and you can do it through social media, is to create this network so that when individuals hear of something, whether it's bullying, intimidation, someone with a gun, somebody with a serious opioid problem, somebody who's suicidal, that can be communicated and it can be responded to. And if you do that, I think the schools will be significantly safer.
Mike Miller, your reaction to the role of the community in trying to stop school shootings and trying to stop violence. And again, violence is down in most cities. It's up in the city of Chicago. Why, in your opinion?
Boy, you know what's I can look at data. As an economist, I tend to be data oriented. Years ago, when I was a kid, and that's a lot of years ago, there were guns everywhere. And there were even gun clubs at high schools, and people would bring them in their cars, and then after school they would have and people didn't get shot. How could you have, if guns caused the problem, how could you have all these guns and there were no problems, and now we have guns and we have problems? To me, the problem is cultural. It's not the guns. Something has happened that people don't value human life. And they're willing, and for some reason, they're willing to go to they don't think of the permanence of the actions that they take, that they kill someone.
Do you agree with that, Dan?
No, if you really don't value human life, then you would oppose the raft of 90% supported common sense regulations, like making sure people that have mental illness don't get guns, and if you can't fly, then you can't buy a gun, and the 30 other provisions that our continued societal indulgence of dystopian gun nuts in the NRA blocks us from implementing common sense reforms that would save
That's
lives.
me. I'm evil.
Back
I'm NRA.
in Chicago in a moment.
If you look hard enough, go off the beaten track far enough, you'll find an America teeming with the unusual, the odd, the downright strange.
I'm Will Klinger, and I'm your guide on a package tour we like to call
Wild Travels.
While we're preparing a new season of Wild Travels for next year, join me for some of our favorite episodes Tuesdays at 7:30 p.m. on WTTW Prime.
Moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
Bruce DuMont back in Chicago. Paul Vallis, you have been critical, obviously, of Mayor Rahm Emanuel. You're running against him. Rahm Emanuel has said to a growing number of times in the last couple of years that he inherited somewhat of a fiscal mess. You were a member of the Daley administration. You ran the Chicago Public Schools. You were the budget director of the city of Chicago for a while. Does some of that blame rightfully belong on Rich Daley, and does some of it belong on you because you were the chief bean counter for a portion of that administration?
Well, let me point out that I was budget director before cell phones. So that's
Okay, that's good.
So I never had a cell phone problem in those days. No, but but let me just say, I'm never gonna live that down. Let me just say that when I ran when I was the city budget director in the Chicago Public Schools,
Right.
Because we did long-term financial planning, because we saw the budgets as investment documents, and during that period, our enrollment in the schools grew by 30,000. I think there's now 70,000 fewer kids in the school system than when I was budget director. And you can grow yourself out of a lot of problems. I mean, a large part of the city's problems is the fact that it has declining enrollment, and declining enrollment, that has a declining population.
Well, let me just interject for a minute, okay? Because you're going a little far afield of the question I asked. When you were the budget director,
Right, so
and you had the ear of the mayor,
Right.
Mayor Daley and Mayor Daley before him and Byrne and all the mayors we've had, with the exception of Harold Washington,
Right.
they rarely said no to anybody.
Well, look,
Should Mayor Daley have said no much more frequently than he did? And
Well-
would we be in the mess today if he had done that?
after I was gone, I think the mayor can answer for himself from 2001 to 2011 when Ron became mayor. But the bottom line is, during my tenure, Daley supported my efforts to do long-term financial planning and to, in effect, keep spending within existing available revenues. So let's talk about what we left Chicago with. So when I left as budget director, we had a structurally balanced budget, no borrowing, no kicking the can down the road, no scoop and toss, 13,500 police officers on the street, and we had the type of infrastructure plan that had resurfaced about 70% of the city streets. And the pension systems were fully funded. When I left the Chicago Public Schools, and you remember, Bruce, one of the first shows I did was when I was appointed CEO of the Chicago Public Schools. We inherited a school district that had a 5-year projected structural deficit of $1.2 billion and declining enrollment, 20 years of declining enrollment. We left a system with $556 million in cash reserves in its operating funds, over $1 billion in all funds combined, 12 bond rating upgrades. And you don't get bond rating upgrades by kicking the can down the road. A fully funded pension system, 30,000 more students, 78 new school buildings, and 6 years of improved test scores. So the bottom line is, we engaged in the type of budgetary management practices that, in effect, transformed budgets into investment vehicles, and the net product was a growing city, a growing school system, increased enrollment, et cetera. And we left the district. I mean, who gets 12 bond rating upgrades? And for the layman out there, bond rating is like going in and getting an MRI to determine what your actual physical health is.
I want to do one more thing, and then Brian, I'm going to let you jump in. You may have some questions as well. And that is, your successor as the head of CPS was Arnie Duncan, went on to become the head of U.S. Education.
Right.
Last week he said, in response to the lack of legislative action at the federal level, he said there should be a national boycott of public schools. What do you think of that idea?
Well, great. That may make you feel good, having national boycotts. And, anything you can do to basically galvanize public support, to push people to enact legislation, responsible legislation, is certainly something that should be encouraged and applauded. But
so you would encourage it?
No. Well, I would encourage.
Some of it's just for press.
Right. I would encourage protest, and I would encourage people getting out and registering to vote. Let's make sure that the generation that's protesting are all registered to vote. The bottom line, though, is after the protest, after the kids are out of school for a week, and you have working families who are not necessarily going to be able to afford to have their children out of school for a week because they can't have babysitters. There's no place to send their kids, so to speak. At the end of the day, are your schools going to be any safer? Because you know what's going to happen. They're going to pass, if they pass anything, it'll be kind of cosmetic, limited reforms that will, in effect, have no real impact in the community. So that there's no substitute. There's absolutely no substitute for having a public safety plan for your schools that ensures that you've got police officers in the school, that ensures that you have the type of protocol so that if you have a live shooter or if you have a risk of having a live shooter, you're taking the appropriate steps. You know where the safe place, you know how to secure your classrooms. And third, having the type of information gathering network, which you can do over social media, so you're gathering the intelligence that you need to anticipate these events. Because in so many of these shooting events, the shooters telegraphed. The shooters told somebody. That stuff was circulating on the internet. And so you can create a system so that you can gather information so that you can take the appropriate action.
Brian, you want to comment? on anything? I know you've been quiet for a long time.
I got a lot I want to say.
Go ahead, jump in.
Well, regarding education, and you're talking to a libertarian on this now. You talk about safety, or talk about like educational standards, like increasing. Like
Well,
which
right now
aspect
we're
are you
talking
going
about
for?
right now we're talking about safety.
Okay. With regards to the schools, and you were talking about, getting rid of the public school system, one of the problems that we have as libertarians is that the government has a monopoly on it. Now, I'm a little biased on this. My wife, who is currently running for comptroller for the state of Illinois, has a master's degree in accounting, is a CPA, homeschooled from kindergarten all the way through 12. Not everybody has that option. She actually grew up living in the mountains, in the Santa Clara Mountains in California for a few years. The way her family structure was, it worked out really well for her. She's done very well for herself. I'm proud of her. Not everybody has that option. Today, currently, she works for a network of charter schools in the city. And the charter schools, that they do very well, they have a great reputation. Who are they funded by? Where does most of that money come from? I'll give you a hint. One of them is named Pritzker, and one of them is named Rauner. So that money does come out there. People are willing to dump that money in to improve these systems. And I think that if you can end the monopoly on the public school system and allow the charter schools, independent schools to open up and flourish, you're going to get the safety along with the increased standards, and it's going to save people a lot of money. Property taxes go down. Suddenly people might want to come back to Illinois.
Look, I was superintendent in Bridgeport, and Sandy Hook was our neighbor school district, and we had
Connecticut.
That's right, in Connecticut, and it was Bridgeport, Connecticut, not Bridgeport, Chicago.
Yes.
So, and we had a teacher who actually lost her daughter. His daughter was in one of those classrooms. So even the most idyllic community, a community where there's a complete absence of crime, there are people out there that are dangerous, and if those individuals, for whatever reason, are able to access a weapon, and regardless of what sort of gun control laws you enact, there's going to be millions of weapons circulating in our communities. And if they can, there's always a risk that they will get access to a gun. So you've got to take the appropriate precautions. And I know charter schools that have police officers in the schools, and charter schools that have this 24/7, because I know in my districts, there have been charter schools that take the same precautions that traditional schools take, because they realize the risk, and they realize that you have to take preventive measures.
I think Paul is right about from the perspective of managing a school district, you need to have safety mechanisms. But talking about, gun violence can affect the school anywhere. It was 30 years ago that my elementary school, a child was murdered and 6 other children were shot.
Last Sunday night, 30th
Yeah,
anniversary.
that's right, 30 years ago.
And Dan.
Things, I think, are finally starting to change, where our laws that tolerate anyone owning a gun and essentially anyone purchasing a gun, all because some people want to elevate their hobby and their idea that I need to have a stockpile of weapons because of some dystopian future. That attitude is changing, thankfully.
I want to move off of gun control at the moment and go back to a question to you, Paul. Last week it was announced that Chicago's population continues to decline. Does it make any difference to you whether Chicago is the 3rd or 4th largest city in the United States?
Well,
practically, what does it mean? I live in Chicago. What do I care if we're 4th instead of 3rd?
Well, where you rank isn't important. What's important is when a city is not growing, when a city is declining, it impacts everyone. Because look, our property values in the city of Chicago are still below the 2008 Great Recession. It's something like double digits, where property values, the recovery of property values nationally have been 7-8%. That is a reflection of the fact that the city is declining. The city is declining from a population standpoint. The city is declining economically.
How do you change it?
Yeah,
Yes,
well, you change it by doing a number of things. You change it by setting priorities so that budgets are long-term financial plans that bring financial stability and predictability to both working families as well as businesses, and that those budgets are investment vehicles. That means you invest in initiatives that are designed to improve public safety. And that means making sure that you not only have enough police officers, but you have the infrastructure of support within the police department, like enough supervisors, enough training officers, et cetera, so that you not only have effective policing, but effective accountability. It means that when you allocate your economic development resources, you're allocating them in ways so that you're building up and investing in areas that are underperforming.
I want to hear from our economist from DePaul.
Yeah,
whether you buy what Paul just said.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about numbers, but the numbers that matter, for example, Chicago is 74th out of 75 cities in financial condition. We're the next to the worst.
Right.
Retiree health care benefit debt, 49th out of 50 cities. 51 public corruption convictions per year since 1976. These are numbers that matter. Here's the problem in terms of why would someone want to leave the city of Chicago? I'm trying to get out myself. I actually live in the burbs, but I'm trying to get out of Illinois as a whole. Think of what the mayor said when Chick-fil-A wanted to open a store in downtown in Chicago. Chick-fil-A has the highest amount of revenue per store of any fast food restaurant. And he said they don't match our values, whatever the heck that means. Would you be one who would be willing to at least to let, say, Walmart come in or Chick-fil-A come in? Or are you going to use your judgment as to who is Chicago and who is not?
We'll get that answer when we pause. I'm Bruce Dumont. Don't go away. Thanks for joining us on this live Facebook edition of Beyond the Beltway. Live from Chicago, it's Saturday Night Live, The Experience. Tuesday through Sundays and open late on Wednesday nights at the Museum of Broadcast Communications. Order tickets at museum.tv.
CSX moves forward, so do the rest of us.
Back in Chicago, Paul Vellis, the question that Mike Miller asked you before the break, if you were mayor, would you look at places either like Walmart or specifically Chick-fil-A, where the mayor has said basically they're not really wanted in Chicago, at least Chick-fil-A?
Well, you know, I don't think you should give people litmus tests, you know, particularly when you're talking about chains or national chains that can create opportunities, economic opportunities. You know, I mean, you're always going to set standards, but I think, you know, I think the mayor, well, look at what they did with Ricketts, you know. Mr. Ricketts decides to...
Cubs owner.
Yeah, the Cubs owner decides that he's going to contribute to Romney's campaign. So he literally delays the
mayor does.
Wrigleyville project. The mayor delays the Wrigleyville project for 18 months. You know, simply because he wanted to impress the president or whatever. But so, I think you can go overboard at the end of the day. I mean, this isn't like ancient Rome. This isn't Emperor Commodus, you know, basically, dispensing wisdom or sending out Caesarian edicts, so to speak.
Paul,
at the end of the day, I think you need to be less. You need to interfere less.
Those listening around the country are hearing your articulation and depth of articulation on a variety of issues, because you've been part of the Chicago, political scene. Your administrative background with Chicago and Philadelphia and Haiti and everything else. I mean, you're a national figure when it comes to education, certainly education administration. You ran for governor in a primary against Rod Blagojevich, and you lost. Mm-hmm. You ran for the lieutenant governor along with Pat Quinn, and you lost. Mm-hmm. Why is it important for you to be an elected official?
Well, I've always felt that I needed the executive authority to implement things that I feel can be game changers. For example, I did a project for U.S. Attorney General Sally Yates, and it was a project designed to revamp education in the prison system, to create programs, adult ed and occupational training, so you could you could significantly reduce recidivism. It was an extraordinary project, an extraordinary person to work for, by the way. The bottom line is Trump gets elected, Sessions comes in, dismantles everything that she was attempting to do. And this was an extraordinary initiative. And at the time that I was doing that project, I brought the same team to look at Illinois and to look at what we could do at both the state and the local level to implement similar reforms, because we had seen some extraordinary things being done in states to significantly reduce recidivism. And there's different people have different ideas. There's always the give and take. Some people have other priorities. The whole idea is I see solutions to serious problems, and I feel that being in a position of executive authority will give me the means to, in effect, articulate these solutions and to move these solutions forward. So one of the reasons I ran for governor.
Your critics will say, Paul, that you really need it for one more thing on your resume. That you have a distinguished resume, but next month you're going to be 65 years old. You need it to put a cap on your resume. What do you say to those critics?
I haven't heard anybody say that yet, but if there are critics out there who believe that, believe me, I wasn't planning on running for mayor at this stage of my life. At the end of the day, I've always been a public servant, and I have always gravitated toward challenges. All the public service jobs I've had have been jobs that involve major turnaround that I've been invited to participate in. I believe that this city's in trouble. I grew up in this city. I love this city. I've served the city for 12 years, and I think I served the city well and responsibly. So for me, it's about having the skills and the means to, in effect, address the city's critical problems, and to do it in such a way so that all Chicagoans are benefiting, and just not the few handful of individuals who have been thriving.
Earlier this year, you lost your son, your 24-year-old son. Must have been very devastating for you. How did that tragedy affect where you are today, and how did that bring you to where you are today?
Well, all my boys, and as you know, my two older boys were in the service, and they're now policemen, not in Chicago. One's in Wheeling and one's in San Antonio. And all of my boys, including my youngest, strongly encouraged me to run. They were probably most supportive. And so I think clearly there was a period where we had a pause and to not only reassess, but I wanted to make sure that my wife was comfortable too, because she's a very private person, and running for public office can subject you to all sorts of things, so I had to make sure that everybody was comfortable with us continuing in this race. But I'll tell you, it's made me more determined to move forward. I have two sons. When they joined the military, I didn't encourage them to join. They joined on their own. When my oldest son went to Afghanistan, he made that decision on his own. When my young son went with me to New Orleans and then spent time in Haiti and did his service in Haiti, he did that on his own. He decided to do that. He wanted to do that. So we've always been a family of public servants, and I just feel that, if anything, the loss of my son has made me even more determined to take on this challenge so I can offer my services and try to make a difference.
It's brought you a level of empathy that voters could also relate to.
When you spend time in New Orleans after Katrina, and when you go to Haiti like a month after the earthquake, in a disaster that you would have thought Port-au-Prince was like Hiroshima after the bomb, where 175,000 to 225,000 people died within 7 minutes. Certainly the loss of my son has helped me understand the critical issues that young people are facing when it comes to drug addictions and this hold, because the drug scourge is like the Great Plague in Europe. It's indiscriminate in who it destroys and the families that it suffers. So it's made me more empathetic, but I think all my experiences combined have given me an empathy that I think I've always had.
Paul Vallas wants to be mayor of Chicago. I'm Bruce DuMont. Paul, thanks for being with us. We will continue with our panel and roll on for another full hour when we roll on from Chicago. I'm Bruce DuMont on this Memorial Day weekend.
Welcome to the world, 2116. You can fly across town in minutes, or across the globe in under an hour. Whole communities are living on Mars, and solar satellites provide Earth with unlimited clean power. In less than a century, Boeing took the world from seaplanes to space planes, across the universe and beyond. And if you thought that was amazing, you just wait.
Today, fresh fruits and vegetables will go from a field in California to a grocer in Miami. A bottle of beer from Eagle Pass will journey to a restaurant in Manhattan. A 2x4 in Oregon will find its way to a townhome in Denver. A hybrid will say goodbye to Detroit and hello to a showroom in Austin. While a steel beam will leave a mill in Illinois for a high-rise in Phoenix. And a flat screen in China will head to an electronics store in Memphis. Because today, as every day, wherever you find business, you'll find us.
Live from Chicago, it's Saturday Night Live, The Experience. Tuesday through Sundays and open late on Wednesday nights at the Museum of Broadcast Communications. Order tickets at museum.tv.